Ozymandias is a poem in which we have a speaker who we don't know the identity of is telling a story about a story they were told. So it's like a story twice removed. And that story, they met a traveller in an ancient land, and that traveller tells them a story about seeing the statue of Ozymandias, who was a real Egyptian pharaoh in ancient Egypt. And they see this broken statue of Ozymandias. And this little story of seeing this broken statue becomes this brilliant poem that basically explores the transience of human power when compared to time, condemns tyrants, and also explores the power of art as well. The key themes of this poem include the power of time versus the power of humans, the transience of human power. Transience is just a fancy way of saying like it's not permanent, it will disappear over time. The abuse of power, the power of art. All of these themes are really heavily interlinked. For example, the transience of human power can be explored when linked to the power of art. The transience of human power is obviously also explored in a link to the power of like time. And the abuse of power by a tyrant is also linked to that transience of human power too. So there's a lot of cross links between the different themes too. That means that you could look at a lot of the same quotes for the multiple different themes. The main language feature that we want to be analysing in this poem is the symbolic significance of the statue. Okay, the fact that it symbolises, a form of art and therefore the power of art and how we use art as a way of immortalising ourselves and our power, but then also how therefore the destruction of that statue represents the transience of our power. Looking at key lines within that, you can then also look at things like the trunkless legs of stone and analyse how that can also ultimately be a metaphor for the transience of human power. It being a half-sunk and shattered visage. You can analyse what it suggests about tyrants in the expression on the statue's face, with lines like the sneer of cold command, the parallelism in the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. You can also analyse language in suggesting the kind of meaninglessness of human power ultimately compared to time, with language like lifeless things. So lots of different kind of language there in the way that the statue is described that you can link back to the power of art and the transience of human power and the abuse of power by tyrants as well. This poem is actually incredibly rich in structure. It's so much fun to analyse from a structural perspective. So I would say that there are quite a few different things you want to think about. There's the fact that it is in a sonnet, so that links to the theme of the power of art in that it's following the artistic tradition of using particular forms. It's actually a Petrarchan sonnet. However, Shelley breaks some of the rules to the Petrarchan sonnet, and therefore it's also a comment on how things can change and develop over time, because Shelley has taken this traditional art form, but he's also changed it and adapted it for use of his own poem as well. So the very structure of the poem is itself a comment on the power of art. You've also got the volta with nothing besides remains. So you're able to analyse how things have changed from our statue of Ozymandias, who thought he was all powerful, with the line, look on my works ye mighty and despair, and how that is then juxtaposed against actually now there's no one to look in despair because everybody's dead, this is all meaningless, the statue is completely broken and alone. So you can analyse that, and also something I should have mentioned actually back with the language question is that lone and level sands stretching far away, and how that is symbolic of the power of nature over basically everything else. The context of this poem essentially serves to explain why the themes are the way that they are, why the ideas are the way that they are. And the short answer is they are the way that they are because that's what Percy Shelley thinks. Percy Shelley is a romantic poet writing in the 19th century. Now, Romanticism, to give you the kind of short version, Romanticism as a literary movement is all about exploring emotion versus fact and reason. It's all about celebrating kind of nature, the human equality, connection to God over logic, science, reason, industry, money, power. Shelley is also, just in his own personal views, very anti-royalty, very anti the kind of class system and how the working classes end up always kind of at the bottom and dealing with the most suffering. And so what he's exploring in his poem is essentially that abuse of power by those with the power, and why that is, wrong, and criticizing that. But he's also pointing out, their power is transient. They're not always going to be this powerful. It's ultimately meaningless in the wider scope of things. And he's exploring that the feelings that we have about, how we can obsess over power and really desire power and want to immortalize ourselves as statues and all that kind of stuff. But also that feeling of life is ultimately meaningless and empty because of those loner level sands, because of that time that's just going to kind of outlast all of us.